welcome everybody to the Cello Museum's first Cello Book Club meeting. I'm Brenda Neese and I curate the Cello Museum. And we also have today our Cello Museum intern, cellist Jonathan Simmons. And he's zooming in from Georgia here to help us with any technical issues. And he'll also be monitoring the chat for any questions that I may miss coming in. So thank you for being here, Jonathan. And we're going to hold questions for the end, but you can go ahead and send them through the chat at any time. And Jonathan and I will collect those as we go along. Isabel, if you see them coming in and want to address them, just dive right in as you wish. But if you could preface your questions with a capital Q so that they're easy to spot in the chat. And also, if you have any issues with your mics or cameras or anything you're having trouble with, if you could preface that with help at the front and ignore the support button that seems to have appeared on the bottom panel of the screen, because that is for more tech support. At this time, I want to say how excited I am to have Isabel Rogers here with us, poet, novelist, and cellist, author of Life, Death, and Cellos, among other things. And she is the author of our first book choice of 2021 and our first book of our new club. Isabel is from a musical family, and her mother is an opera singer, and her sister is sings as well. And she got an early start in music herself. She actually gave up her first instrument, the violin, at age 4, and luckily for us, she took up the cello at age 9. It's a very good age. Playing in a number of youth orchestras, including her county youth orchestra. And then she studied with a student of the great William Pleath, who used to tell her about playing duets with the great Jacqueline Dupre. That's not daunting at all. And in addition, she played the French horn for a few years, and she sings too, participating in her church choir from an early age, and then following that with school chamber choirs. And she's been playing and singing in amateur groups all of her life. She started writing as a teenager and published poems in literary magazines, and she's won prizes along the way. And she was the Hampshire Poet Laureate of 2016. And I'm going to leave her to tell you about her wickedly funny novel, Life, Death, and Cellos. So without further ado, here is Isabel Rogers. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Brenda. That makes me sound much more impressive than I really am. And before I go any further, I must just apologize. I can barely see you. My hair is about 3 inches longer than it usually is, so we just mustn't mind lockdown hair. Okay, everybody. It's a complete honor to be your first guest on your book club. So thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, this is Life, Death, and Cellos. It's my first published novel. I think it was published in 2019 now, I think. It's not the first novel I wrote, but that's probably for the best. It's still in a drawer somewhere. And it really came out because I've spent my life, as Brenda said, just being in a musical family and hanging around musicians. And if anybody has played or sung, these characters are too good to waste, frankly. So I just kind of honed in on them, and the story grew up around the people that I was with. I didn't nick anybody whole. I've got a whole load, my sister included. There's a whole load of really, really nervous mezzos and sopranos who think, "Oh, did you nick me? Am I Mrs. Ford Hughes?" And I have to say, no. And there's a couple of nervous viola players too. But honestly, I never nicked anybody whole. I may have nicked a little bit and put them in, but that's what my lawyers told me to say anyway. I thought if it's all right with you, Brenda, and everybody else, I mean, please say no, and wave at me to stop if you want. I thought I would read you 4 or 5 little tiny bits. I'm assuming, I don't know if it's right, that most people here have read the book, so I don't want to give anything away. I've picked things that I'm going to read that won't necessarily spoil it if you haven't read the book. But I thought I'd give a bit of a flavour of the writing, and then we can talk about how I came to write these bits if you want. I don't know. One particular bit, it's the pink tab that's never been read out by me before in public, because it's to do with cellos, and usually I don't have such an erudite audience, so you get one of them. But I thought I'd just read you the inciting incident. It actually happens at the beginning of chapter 2, where poor old Oscar, and I'm not giving anything away to say that he is he dies, basically. There's no finer point on that, but I had to make it a funny death just to kick the whole plot going. So this is poor old Oscar. The last minute of Oscar's life was one of his happiest, driving Adams's fast machine for an even shorter ride than usual. The orchestra gathered momentum like a wave about to break, and he imagined he was surfing with the easy skill of a Californian wearing Speedos and an all-year tan. All conducting lessons were forgotten. He flung his head back as the fortissimo crashed over him, circling both arms furiously in a classic novice error, the Cervantes windmill. Drops of sweat sprinkled the front desks as he tossed his hair out of his eyes. The strings persevered with their 4 ledger-line squeaks, ever dutiful despite being inaudible beneath the razzing brass. A few players cursed him, including Marco, first violin, inside second desk, a bit sweat-spattered. But even Marco wasn't being literal when he thought, "Oh, just sod off and die, you tosser." I forgot to apologise for the small swear. Sorry about that. It's quite sweary. My mother thinks it's very swearing. That's another story. I do get digressed. Sorry. Get back to the text, Isabel. When the horns, trumpets and timpani joined the home straight, the sheer climax of it all was too much for Oscar's diseased heart and button-straining girth. He stopped mid-beat and, with a puzzled expression, fell slowly backwards off the podium. His landing was cushioned by a lady in the front row, her surprised yelp drowned out by dogged chords from the trombones who hadn't looked up. By the time a hushed awfulness settled, Oscar was already dead. Poor Oscar. So that's how it all starts. And if you read the book, you'll know that the lady Oscar squashed on the way down was the Mrs. Ford Hughes, who is possibly my favourite singer of all time now. I've grown enormously fond of her. I've now written 3 books, and I'm on the 4th already. And the more I get to know her, the more warm and friendliness comes out. She comes across maybe at the beginning of this as a bit of a baddie, but she redeems herself, put it that way, by the end of it. So Brenda, are you all right for me just to sort of zip through the things I was going to read if you want, and then we'll pick up at the end?
Yes, please. Entirely
up to you. Okay. So the next bit I wanted to share with you is a little bit further in, when I go off onto sort of a ramble, really, is the only way of putting it, about why people play in orchestras, because, well, I've met a lot of them, and most of this is true, not from my perspective, but shut up, Isabella, get on with the book. Why play in an amateur orchestra? The answer is usually either to have sex, gossip about who else is having sex, have a crush on the conductor, pretend to read Proust to the trombone or timpani rests, or wait for the pint after the rehearsal. There are those who join for a love of music or a desire to expand their cultural knowledge, but frankly, they're usually at the back of violas and nobody talks to them much. There are orchestras in most of the cities and towns across Britain of varying degrees of competence. If you're lucky, you get a professional conductor. Sometimes you get a young, soon-to-be professional conductor about whom you can then say smugly, "Oh, yes, of course, I worked with him before the LSO snapped him up." Sometimes you get a conductor who should be doing something else, almost anything else. You can identify this type as their nose gets increasingly close to the score in the tricky bits, only to emerge with a beaming smile at the next big tune they recognise, hoping the terrified first violins didn't notice he let them get on with it themselves round all those semi-quaver corners. That type of conductor doesn't even know any viola jokes. There is no point to them. The hive mind of an orchestra can instantly perceive this and usually chews them up and spits them out within a few months. I'm sure we've all been in either orchestras or choirs, and I think it takes on the air of a class with a supply teacher, and you just know they're not ready for it, and you all know each other, and you'll have each other's in-jokes and backs, and they, poor things, they don't last. But there you go. And I'm very rude about brass players as well, but I'm allowed to because I was one a bit as well. So there you go. So now, for anybody that doesn't know her, I want to introduce you to a little bit of Mrs. Ford Hughes. She was squashed by Oscar, was injured, and took her money away from the orchestra, basically, and they had to offer her something to get back her money and her support, or the orchestra wasn't going to survive. So the thing they had to give her was a solo, and she is rather fond of the sound of her own voice, and she's always wanted to do Strauss' Four Last Songs. And she's probably one of the Florence Foster Jenkins types that shouldn't really have been, but they had no choice, so they had to. So this was the first rehearsal with Mrs. Ford Hughes, and she's just about to sing, and nobody's heard her yet. For 3 bars, it went quite well. Halfway through the 4th, Mrs. Ford Hughes came in. She had begun to fill her lungs at Joshua's first downbeat, increasing imaginary room in them by raising her eyebrows and tipping her head forward so that by the time she sang her first note, she was like a whale primed for a deep dive. Her Arkansas vowels spiked through Hermann Hesse's text like stubble through a drag queen's foundation. Strictly speaking, it was not her fault the phrase opened with no fewer than 3 umlauts, but perhaps she should shoulder some blame for producing no sound approximating to any of them. Mrs. Ford Hughes managed to invoke a rawhide and sawdust twang to the whole thing with the nasal delivery of a second-rate country singer. By the word lüften, which rises to a top A, her vibrato width would have rivaled Peter Pears during his wobbliest later years. I think you get to understand my proclivities in classical music, and I'm very rude about things I don't like, so I'm terribly sorry if you don't agree. Would you like to hear the cello bit? Is that okay to say?
Yes, please.
This I don't usually read this bit out because it's very cello-y and it doesn't have any jokes in. So this is the kind of serious bit, so we must all look a bit serious. I love the Elgar. Of course I love the Elgar. We all love the Elgar. I never got close enough. Brenda, you're probably miles better than me. I never got close enough to perform it, but I did get decent enough at it to be able to play through it at home myself. So I do know the piece quite well under my hands, and I loved playing it. And I obviously just tried to put a bit of my knowledge the way I tried to get Erin to play it. So this is talking about the second movement, the slow movement of the cello concerto. And he, at the beginning, I'm talking about Elgar himself. He made the cello sing about death and the futility of war. Sorry, third movement. The third movement especially captures his anger, bound up in regret for such a catastrophic waste of life. Its adagio quaver beats have a pulse of less than 1 per second, and the cello seems to sigh from one phrase to the next, as if lamenting all those millions of lost souls in the mud. To play that melody takes a phenomenal control of arm muscles. Erin felt the first few phrases whisper their questions as she lifted them up, as a voice will lift when asking for something, when the answer seemed to be that there was no redemption and no reason for the slaughter. She reached for those octave leaps, as if doubling the wavelength could bring some understanding unknown in the undergrowth of solid ground. The whole movement undulates up and down the cello's register, holding notes at the crest of each hill over to the next bar, so there is no feeling of pulse. Wilfred Owen once said that the poetry was in the pity. Elgar wove pity through that movement, wrapping it hard into the stay with each rising and falling phrase. Some are so cloaked in accidentals, you no longer knew which key to feel at home in, so it wanders rudderless in a no man's land of shifting harmony until it tries to come home again. And just when you thought the melody had come safely into harbour with a B flat, it turns in on itself and falls down to a fourth to an F instead. It leaves you wrong-footed, feeling unfinished. Erin felt the vibrations of her cello pass into her breastbone. They were strong when, nearly at the end of the movement, she played lower, as if the music was finally written back in the bass clef it had started in, after its stratospheric wanderings through the tenor clef and even into the treble clef on its last pause, and a top D which seems to hang forever, pianissimo, but with all the control of a juggernaut of grief waiting to give it impetus to return down again. She was on point, holding up the world. And that's enough seriousness for the evening. Thank you very much. Goodness me. I made a joke on Twitter earlier that I was going to read a serious bit to cellists who knew what they were talking about, and I thought I'd have to get my poetry voice out and imagine I'm at a poetry reading. So enough of that. Do you want a last bit? Have you got time for a last reading? Are you bored yet?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is another funny bit, I hope. I just wanted to throw in choirs as well, because I've spent a lot of time singing choirs, and this was talking about how Elliot was rehearsing his choir doing the Bach when they were getting ready to join the orchestra. So this was just the choir rehearsal, and it's the amount of faff that choirs can do. Elliot was at the more relaxed end of the conducting spectrum, often perching on his high stool on one buttock with all the jumper-wearing charm of a younger Val Dunican. He had the hair that comes from formative years at public school, or a parsimonious attitude to hairdressing trips, much like myself at the moment. 2 weeks before the concert, the Stockwell singers gathered for their regular rehearsal in a further education college, less than a mile from the school where the orchestra met. There was the usual chatting and milling about that happens before any music starts, just like orchestras, but with added aromas of vocal zones and menthol inhalers. It was, after all, winter, and there are no people so ready to guard their voices against the tyranny of germs as singers. The serious ones carried water bottles, which they placed with care by their feet when they sat down. From there, they could take sips every few minutes to keep their throat lubricated, drawing irritated glances from their more down-to-earth neighbours, who had just come along for a nice sing and didn't fanny about with professional tactics like water bottles. The water bottlers tended to congregate at the front of their respective sections, to spearhead the sound as it projected forwards to Elliot and out to the wider beyond and an imagined adoring public. From his vantage point, facing the singers at the front, Elliot could accurately determine what most of them had eaten for lunch that day and how many of them were currently sucking intense vocal lozenges. He'd learned by then to take a couple of steps back when a truly committed chorus attempted Bach or anything else in German or Hungarian. Things tended to get a little damp around the consonants. A conductor's relationship with the choir can sometimes be more intimate than either of them could wish for. So, he said, smiling at them all, sweeping his eyes round quickly and catching those people actually looking at him momentarily as he did so. Some conductors focus on the water bottlers in the front row and ignore the rest of a choir, which leads to distraction and, in the cases of tenors and basses, singing flat. The good conductors managed to make every singer feel that he had looked them straight in the eye and sorry, I can't look you straight in the eye and actually keep my eye on the text. Look them straight in the eye every time he said something. For that kind of attention, a singer will sit up straight and take their eyes off their copy. They will focus. They will sing better. There were those, of course, who had their faces permanently drooped into their music and had learned how to come in a nanosecond after everyone else from years of practice. They were the unreachables. No sane conductor goes after them. They are the collateral damage of a decent performance. Everyone got a copy of the Magnificat? Elliot smiled, sat back and fished his phone out while he waited for the inevitable confusion as people realised they'd walked straight past the open box with the large notice saying, "Take a copy," stood up, squeezed past their neighbours, apologised, got to the box, thought belatedly about who else in their section might have forgotten, called out, remembered a number to pick up, forgot to add themselves to it, returned and finally sat down again, only slightly out of breath, to relate their entire arduous journey to their next-door neighbours. Choirs can faff better than any other group of musicians. Elliot re-pocketed his phone, smiled brightly again as if the last 5 minutes had been erased from his and everyone else's memory, and they were there, keen as the proverbial mustard, to learn notes. And that's the end of my reading, if you want.
That was fantastic. It's wonderful to hear you read it. You know, you hear it in your head when you're reading, but it's wonderful to hear it straight from
It's very silly, Brenda, that's what it is.
It's very familiar is what it is, the walking by the box and then watching, and you know, it's in orchestras I've been in as well, but I know that so many of us are looking forward to getting back to whatever choirs or orchestras that we are in and walking past those boxes, and yes. You know, even the conductors are probably, you know, maybe they don't miss the breath of the front row, but you know. just being that close to people. But I wanted to have you, if you wouldn't mind, talking a little bit about, what inspired you to write this book and, to turn from poetry to a novel.
Sure. The short answer and the truthful answer is I don't know. I've always written. I've always written about lots of different things, and I've always loved serious stuff. But I have tried my hand at writing comedy scripts as well as that. So I knew that I wanted to try comic fiction because I'd loved reading it anyway. And genuinely, it started from feeling of what I could write about with knowledge, and so that I wouldn't have to I'm terribly lazy. So I wouldn't have to go off and do this enormous set of research. Come on, I've got all this knowledge sitting on me. I might as well use it in a way that's natural and useful. And as a musician reading it, you might have spotted that it's a really fine line to when you're writing it. And I had long conversations with my editor about this, about how much we should assume the reader knows and how musical we should assume the reader is, and not get them really bored with all those sort of technical explanations, but also to know at the back of our minds that possibly there might be a reader here that has no classical music knowledge at all, and I couldn't just dump them into it without any kind of explanation. So I'm hoping we've kind of got the middle ground-ish, but I know as musicians, you're probably all musicians, and you must have rolled your eyes at some point saying, oh, we know all that, but I've not answered your question. I've diverted off. Sorry, Brenda.
No, it's all good. When you are writing these experiences, I understand the dilemma of the balance, but even though I've been in orchestras for fair few decades, I still, I enjoyed reading what you wrote about them. It wasn't, oh, well, I know all that. Or even in the sections about the Elgar, it just made me think back to working with my teachers on the Elgar. And so instead of putting me off that you included a little extra detail, maybe for those who haven't played the Elgar, I enjoyed it. So I think for me, you hit the balance exactly right. But I don't know from the other side because I've been around music all my life myself. So,
Sure.
if you, how did you turn, you gave me some background about how this book actually got published. So I didn't know if you would be willing to share that with the group.
Of course, yes. I mean, people that know me on Twitter know that I spend a lot of my life on Twitter. Probably too much. Well, not too much, because it's the most fantastic place. And I met dear friends there. But it actually revolutionized my professional writing life as well. When I wrote my first novel, which is still in a drawer somewhere, I was living in top of Scotland, and I've been there for 10 years, and it was the days before proper internet and stuff like that, so it was still dial-up modems and stuff, and trying to get a novel out there then was utterly different from now. So there's me Kermit flailing on Twitter, as I do, making friends with loads of people. I met Abby Headon on Twitter as a friend. She was doing something, I can't remember what, and we chatted for maybe a couple of years and made each other laugh, and I knew she was funny, and I knew she was musical. She's a flautist, by the way. She went to the academy, and then she got a job with Farrago as their commissioning editor. This was maybe a couple of years ago, a couple of years after we'd made friends, and then she was looking for comedy books, comic fiction, because that's Farrago's only thing that they do, and she sort of chatted to me almost casually and said, I'm looking for new comic fiction to commission. You haven't written a funny book, have you, by any chance? And I said, well, it's funny you should say that. I have. It probably needs a bit of work, and it's quite old now, and I need to do it. But she said, dig it out, spruce it up, send it in. So I did, and she liked it, and that was 3 years ago now, I don't know, a lot. And that was it. So Twitter, genuinely, I've made huge friends, but it's where I work too.
Oh, and I must apologize when you tweet. Sometimes it takes me a few days to catch things. I don't always. I'm not part of the Twitterverse as much.
You don't live there, and it's probably for the best.
I tend to be on Facebook and our virtual museum more, but so how many, I keep referring to, you've kindly offered to do a giveaway later in the session of the first 3 books, and I have just called them a trilogy, but I think you've said more books in the series. So do you have a number of how many books there are going to be, or okay, good. So
how many do people want to buy? I think they'll keep asking me to write them if people buy them. Please buy them.
Well, I've loved them so far, so I hope you'll keep writing them. It's not every day that you come across cello books, although starting to look for them. I do see more and more, but it's not often I sit down and just laugh out loud and repeatedly, to the point where the cats or my husband look up, what are you doing? I have a few questions. We could turn to some questions unless if there's more background you'd like to give about yourself or the book. I'd like to make sure that you share everything you would like to share.
I'm happy to share anything. I think I'm boring, but if anyone here wants to ask me something now, go for it.
Okay, well, if we start with a question that was sent in actually by someone who is here, it's actually Jill Tennant, author of the book for September. But she sent in the question. She said to tell you that she found your book wickedly funny, as did I, and that she feels she pretty well knew all the characters already, which we had another comment here saying that, was it Kathy was saying, I think I knew everyone who is in your book. But she had a question for you. She said, Jill said, what did you find the most difficult when you wrote it, creating the characters in the first place, or deciding on a beginning, or creating a satisfactory end that nevertheless left the door open for further stories to emerge about the same characters? And she said that we all write so differently. It's interesting to get a view of someone else's writing method.
What a great question. What a hard answer. Goodness me. I know enough about my writing now to know I'm a complete pantser, so it was not planned, and I didn't really know who the characters were until I'd written myself into them. So I started with the cello section and Erin, and it sort of went out and out, and as things got more complicated, I would draw more people in from the orchestra, and I've got a plan. I've left in another room. I've got a plan of the Stockwell Polk Orchestra, and I've written the names of the people that I've named, so I know where they sit and who they are, and if they're in the story already, so I know if it's safe to invent somebody else. So the characters evolved as any characters do in my writing throughout the book, and they're not fixed, and I keep discovering more things about them as I write them. I knew it had to essentially be a happy ending, because it's a comic fiction book and you don't want the rug to be pulled out from under you. Essentially you want somebody to buy the book thinking, this is good, this is going to make me laugh, and you don't want to then wrong foot them at the end. That's just not fair. It's not right. So I knew it had to be a concert and it all had to be fine, and there's no great drama about that, and I'm happy with that. But the getting to the end point was I don't know. I can't answer that, because I'm such a pantser when I write. If I can write a paragraph and it's going the wrong direction, sometimes I'll ditch that and go back another way and try and get to the end point another way. And sometimes it'll take 3 or 4 goes to get there. But it's such an organic method for me. I know some people have spreadsheets and they've got scenes and they've got things that the beats that they want to hit, and they write to those very. I'm in awe of anybody that can be that organized. It's all much of a blur, as you can tell from my, it's just me on the page.
Well, it makes it very approachable, and it makes it very real, and that's why I think a lot of us say, oh, I've met that character or that character or elements of the other. I was laughing so hard when you talked about the water bottle carriers in the choir. Because I've tried to sing, but people prefer it when I play the cello.
I'm one of the water bottlers. Sorry.
Oh, well, yes. Anyway, I had a quick question. Then I think then we'll open it up to the floor for anyone who has a question. I see that Leora has I see Q, but I don't see the question. So she's going to ask a question. Let's open it. Let's let her answer. If I can figure out how to unmute, or if you can unmute, Leora. Let's see. Sorry, technical. Okay.
Hi, Leora. No, I can't hear. Can everyone hear except me? Because I can't hear Leora.
It looks like,
okay.
Okay, it looks like she's unmuted, but I don't see. Okay, she's typing. While she's typing, I have a very quick question. Have you actually played a Strad or more than one Strad?
I played one once, and it was the most incredible thing. I was probably too young to appreciate it at the time. It was mid-teens, I guess, and I was shocked to be allowed to have a go, and was absolutely terrified. But honestly, the first bow, it was like something alive. I don't know how to describe it, because I hadn't had a very good cello before, and I'd done my best with it. And you know how you play it, if you play a worse instrument, you really have to work on your technique to get there. And I was putting everything in, and it just leapt out at me. It was extraordinary, but I didn't play for very long, and I've never performed on one. Have you, Brenda?
I've played just briefly. I've not performed on them. I had a go on the one in the Smithsonian, the Survey Strad. And I've tried the one in the Library of Congress. I never got to try William Pleath's Strad because his son had it out at the time, but I played a couple of his other cellos. So the scariest thing for me was going to the what was then the Shrine to Music Museum and is now the National Music Museum for the United States. And I was going to get to study the King, which was then not played. But as he was going, he got his keys, went to the case and went in, and then he opened it up and then took it out and said, "Here, just hold it," and handed it to me. And then he was proceeding to lock up the case again. And I was standing there going, "Okay, don't drop it, don't drop it, don't." I was about 20 years old. So anyway, but I never got to play that one. So I think, here we go. Here's a question from Leora. And do you have that in your chat, or shall I read it?
I do. As I've written 3 books, did I think about all 3 at once? Do I think about the storyline simultaneously or one at a time? Great question. The answer is absolutely one at a time, because when I wrote the first one, I hadn't even met Abby, and I didn't know it would be published, and it may not have gone anywhere at all. So I tried to make it a rounded whole. So that was it, a standalone thing. And then the next one, Bold as Brass, I knew obviously it had the same characters and it had to follow on. I made the decision to make it follow on in time from the first one, but also Abby was really useful about this. She said, well, people are going to be coming to the second book and they may not necessarily have read the first one. So we tried to drop in as many details as we could to get a new reader in, but also maybe to whet their appetite to go back and read the first one, and they wouldn't spoil things. But certainly the characters develop within themselves, and they have character arcs that go across the books. I think Charlie's deciding whether he's in love with Erin, and that's still going on in book 4. Nothing's happened yet, but it might be. But and things like that. And then by the time we got to the end of book 2, it wasn't clear whether there would be a book 3, because we didn't know how well they were all going to be selling. And of course, publishing takes so long. There's such a long lead time. So I don't know. Each one could be the last, put it that way. So I try and write with hope, but I'm not assuming anything. Does that answer the question?
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions coming in?
Yushin.
Hi. If it's okay, from a person who doesn't play the cello, but I've only dabbled a little bit in classical music, and I have to say one of the things I love about your work is how good you are at signposting. For those of us who are just, entering into classical music, or for those of us who are just entering into poetry, which still terrifies me. You were a remarkable guide. I try to read poets that I know because it provides kind of a, like a little nudge. Oh, if I don't understand this, I can call Isabel and ask her what's going on. But for me, I wondered if you had to step into a different set of shoes entirely to write humor. Some of your poetry work, obviously, because it's you, is quite funny. But I'm wondering if you feel like you have to either put on a different hat or step into different shoes, not to mash up the metaphor too much, but I'd love to hear more about that.
That's a great question. I'm constantly wondering about that myself, but the answer is absolutely different hats, different days, perhaps different years. There seems to be a completely different part of my brain that does poetry than does prose, and especially comic prose. Some of it's really physical. It's very strange. I touch type very fast, and I can put prose on the screen without seemingly thinking about the interface, and it's just there. If I try and write a poem like that, it will come out like Bertie Wooster, or sort of tumty tumty tum, and there's just nothing there, and it's just, I put it in the bin. A poem has to start with a pencil and a piece of paper and no screen and quiet, and it's weird. And then after that, I can put it on the screen and edit, and then I edit a printout on paper. I don't understand it myself, but I'm not going to query it too hard in case it goes.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions coming in? That was a great question.
Sarah? I don't think the unmute button's going to work.
There we go. I got it.
Great.
I loved your writing, and I think some of it is very poetic, in fact, even if you don't think of it that way. I play a lot of Baroque cello, and I loved your descriptions of the early cello and also just early music and the chorus not being that early in the way. And I wondered what your interest was in that side of cello playing and music.
Sure. I mean, I'm very well aware that I am probably, as I've said before, the worst cellist on this screen. So I'm just concerned that you're taking my views on cello playing anything any seriously. I love hearing Baroque music. I love playing it. I've never played a Baroque cello. I know some people who are Baroque musicians, and I know it's very different. And I love the sound that a period instrument makes, and I love the feeling of freedom of it. It's more intimate in a sense, I think, but I wouldn't pretend to be any kind of expert on it, and I appreciate the sound of it. And now, having heard much more, it's much more fashionable now to perform and listen to Baroque in the original, in period instruments and stuff like that. And you hear the stuff from the 70s and the 80s, and you think, what were they thinking? There's huge forces, and it's just all wrong. But I guess it's fashion. I don't know. I love it.
That was a good question. I enjoy I'm sorry, I was trying to, did I accidentally mute somebody here who was, Sarah, did I mute you? Did you have a follow-up? No, okay. No, I think that was an excellent question and wonderful answer. I'm
much more comfortable talking about answers about writing than music, because I'm absolutely an amateur musician.
But you've studied with a police student, and you've played the Elgar, and it's I think
I got so far and no further.
But there are many paths to being involved in the world of cello, and I think that sometimes the world of, especially the internet, you get into this narrow, either you're a performer and you're absolutely professional, or that's it, and you're not really a cellist. But I feel like I've met so many people who, if you play the cello for 2 weeks, you feel like, I'm a cellist. It's this affinity with the instrument. It's this love that I haven't found with, many other instruments. So obviously I'm biased as the founder of the Cello Museum, but that's one thing. I think there are many paths that are valid to calling oneself a cellist or loving the cello, and you know, I admire these tremendous cello jocks, as it were. I am not a cello jock myself. I believe that Jonathan is. I once aspired to be. But I think it's, so I love hearing the viewpoint from a wonderful writer who also plays the cello. I think this is an exciting thing. So do we have any further questions here?
I just wanted to comment, in case you didn't see it in the chat, I love the reference at the very beginning to a shorter ride than usual in John Adams' Very Fast Machine.
I try and get as many layers of joke in as I can, you know.
Oh, I love that line, and there's so many. In fact, I started a section when I read books, I look for the cello references. So I have a page where I have, I'm afraid I write in books, I'm sorry, but I have—
It's your book, you do what you like.
I have cello references, and then the funny ones. I had to start a new column for the quotes that I love for your book, and I don't normally have that. I just, one that I saw again today was amateur orchestral concerts do not usually end in death, no matter how badly some solos are played. So I've only seen one. Actually, I witnessed a conductor die on the podium. Yes, so when I was reading your book, I thought, oh my goodness, I've seen this. So, but it wasn't.
I had no idea something like that had actually happened.
Yes,
what was this?
Yes, it was summer camp. I was 14 years old and sitting in the cello section, and it was cello. He had just turned to us, said cellos, letter J, in the.
It was your fault.
The Shostakovich, it was in the festive overture. He said cellos, letter J, and then he made this horrible noise and fell backwards and slammed his head into, there was a window frame, and then, but he was apparently dead in the air before he even hit his head. But then as teenagers, we had to sit around for 2 hours because they couldn't release us into the wild. It was summer camp, and they had to supervise us, but then they gave him CPR and tried to revive him. It took what seemed like 2 hours until the ambulance got there. Anyway, so when I read your book and the conductor died, I thought, I've seen this. This is real. But he didn't fall.
I'm sorry if it brought it all back.
No, he didn't fall on anyone. And there was no cellos, letter J. And then he turned to us. So those of you all have played the festive overture. If you had that edition, you know letter J.
I've just seen another question.
Good.
From whoever's hiding behind home. Did we all see that? What do you have against viola players? I can't give your book to my sister who's a professional viola. Yes, you can. Of course you can. It's done with great affection. I must tell you, the first draft of this had so many footnotes, and most of the footnotes were viola jokes. And Abby made me take them all out because Abby is a much, much nicer person than I will ever be. And it was a much crueler book before she got her hands on it. And I'm sorry, I've played in orchestras, there are viola jokes. You deal with it. Violas and cellos and tenors, they just have to put up with it. I'm sorry. It's a harsh world out there. That's not a very good answer, is it?
Where would we be without the viola jokes, though? And I think that, I mean, they tell jokes about us, but the secret was when I learned a bit of viola, I thought, this is why they allow all the jokes to happen, because they can steal from everyone. They can play the cello music, they can play violin music, they can play anything, and they like to keep it quiet and relaxed. So they just endure the jokes. And anyway, that was
my. They have their own special cliff.
Yes, which threw me because it's one line off. But anyway. Do we have any further questions, or we can do our prize drawing? I don't want to leave out any questions. I'm going to go ahead and try to put everyone on the screen now, if I can manage that. Well, my showing of everybody is not happening very well. Is anybody? Oh, I see Sarah has her dog. Very cute. And I see,
I should bring mine in.
Yeah, there you go. Well, if we don't have any more questions, let's go ahead and shall we, Jonathan, have I missed any questions in the chat?
No, I think we're all caught up.
Okay.
Shall I show the prize? They won't be these. These are my copies because they've all got things in, but we have new copies of Live, Death and Cellos. And then book 2 is Bold as Brass, which still has the cello section in, but you get introduced to Carl, the trombone player. And then the one that's just out is Continental Riff, which I send them on a European tour.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have, I just have a random number generator on my phone. And I have our list of people who sent in. So I'm going to generate a number and do our prize draw. It is Melissa, and I hope I say your name right, Bosley. And Melissa, are you here today? I don't see Melissa, but Melissa, we will email you, and congratulations. And Isabel, I will give you Melissa's information, and you can
Fantastic
information. So congratulations, Melissa, on the prize draw. That's fantastic. So thank you so much for offering that, Isabel.
That's my pleasure.
And this has been so enjoyable hearing more about your book and hearing all the questions and seeing for the first time, you know, I sit, being a virtual museum, I don't get to actually meet people coming to the desk as I used to when I worked at a brick and mortar museum. So it's lovely to actually put some faces to some of the names I see on Facebook. I just wanted to go ahead and we're gonna, it's been almost an hour and I just have a couple more things. Is there anything else, Isabel, before I start our closing?
Not at all. It's been an absolute delight to be your first guest. I'm so honored. Thank you very much for having me. And I hope I haven't flailed too much.
Oh no, you've been wonderful. I wish that's one thing that Zoom is not very good about is the applause, but if we could give you a round of applause, you definitely deserve it. Yes. So lots of clapping.
Pleasure.
Yes. We just thank you so much for being here. And it's just been such a great pleasure to meet you, having read some of your work now. I'm looking forward to reading more. And I just hope you will keep us posted, especially with the cello-related projects that you are doing. And for March, which is both Women's History Month and Irish American Heritage Month in the USA, we have chosen another wonderful book. This is Maureen O'Carroll. I don't know if it's coming across backwards to you or if it's forwards on your screen. But it is Maureen O'Carroll, a musical memoir of an Irish immigrant childhood by a mother-daughter team, Maureen and Leora O'Carroll. And we have Leora O'Carroll here today with us. And so I'm so happy she's agreed to talk with the book club on the 28th of March at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So keep in mind our time zones, and that's all on the book club page. Leora, would you like to say, I think we were having some audio issues.
We are, yes.
Would you like to, I don't know if it's possible for you to do say a few words about your book. And if it's not possible, we will really look forward to hearing from you in March. I'm really excited about that.
Can I just point out, you're infinitely more glamorous than me, so, you know, I'm in awe.
Well, we have another. I enjoyed two very different kinds of books, and I love them both. And we have actually another one of our authors here, a September author, Jill Tennant, who wrote this book, Mellow Cello, and it's a collection of short stories for cellists. I'm not sure if she had said maybe her bandwidth or something may not be enough for her to say anything. I don't have the September date in front of me, but it's on our website. Jill, would you like to say anything about your book before we close off? I'm not.
Hello.
Here we are.
Yeah. Well, yes, very poor bandwidth. It's dropped off about 5 times during this evening, unfortunately. but I shall see if I can get a further booster. Everyone says, get a booster, and I say, I've got a booster. It still doesn't work. So, yes, hopefully. Much enjoyed reading Isabel's book.
Yes, well, and as did I, and I've enjoyed, it's been such a great treat to get to speak with Isabel today and to get to briefly, if in the dark, meet Jill and to see Leora. And our other books for this year are The House of Music, which you may have seen. It's not specifically cello, but there are lots of cello details in here. And we have Kitty Lambton's The Cellist Notebook for the summer. And we also have The Enchanted Cello Case, which was written by a mother and illustrated by her son, Hillary and Julian. And so this is going to be, this is a great a book as well. So, all right. I just wanted to thank you again, Isabel, for joining us today. And thank you, Jonathan, for helping. And thank you to all of the book club members.
I think Leora may be able to say something in a minute.
Oh,
her son is on their end trying to help him with audio.
Okay. Leora, can you speak to us?
It may take him a second to get it.
Okay.
Zoom always has this air of a seance, doesn't it?
Yes, we're all waiting. It's so frustrating when this happens, especially, you know, if you're teaching as well or taking classes.
I'm so in awe of any music. My kids' music lessons are carrying on online, and the teachers are incredible for doing it. I don't know how they do it.
But it's an interesting thing I found personally with my own teaching is that there are a few students, and some of my students are extremely advanced and some are not. Some I teach a range. The oldest student I've had was 90, but I have young ones too who are kind of there more for their parents than for themselves. But having them online, it's screen time. And this, at least it used to be a novelty. It is not this last year, but before that. So that was good. Anyway, Leora, do we have any progress on the audio?
It doesn't look like it. No.
Oh, Leora. Okay. I'm so sorry about that, Leora. I was so looking forward to hearing a bit about your book directly from you, but we will hear from you in March and really look forward to that. So everybody get ready with this wonderful memoir. So yes, I just wanted to thank everybody and thank you all for being part of the Cello Museum family. And so I want to, does anyone have any parting words here?
I just want to say thank you to you and brilliant Zooming. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And I hope that everybody stays well. Please stay in touch online. And I look forward to seeing you all again in March. And Isabel, I hope that we can have you on again with another cello book at some point.
I'll do my best.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And
thank you.
All right.